So you probably used ChatGPT or Claude or something else like Gemini in a web browser or in an app, and you've asked it to help you with something, to help you make something, to help you refine something, to help you put some information together, to do some research, to do some searching. And that's awesome. I love that stuff. I still use those tools too. But then there's kind of some limitations that you hit if you're trying to do anything where you're coding. It's pretty good at it. It'll help you build views and dashboards and documents and such. But anytime you have it help you write code, you're going to be copying and pasting back and forth between it and wherever you're putting your code or whatever it is you're building. Then you've got stuff like GitHub Copilot or Cursor that integrate with your developer environment like VS Code and help you write code there. And they're really great too. And with Copilot, you could use Claude as a backend and make it even more powerful. Even then, still, that's limited to the context typically of your code environment or whatever folders you're working in for your code. And then there's Claude Code, which is like a level deeper. It's Anthropic's command line tool that you install on a system. It becomes like an actual agent on a system. And it can read files anywhere you give it access to on that system. It can run API calls, it can run tools, it can install things, it can test your code. It can do pretty much anything you could do with the command line, but itself on the computer that you give it access to. It's not scoped to a single folder or IDE. Think of it less like a chatbot and more like a collaborator that can actually operate your computer. And the name Claude Code can be a bit misleading. I mean, it is really good at coding, but it's really good at a lot of stuff like writing and research and automation and file management. It's more like a personal assistant that just happens to run in the terminal. And then actually I take my Claude Code and I put another layer on top of it that I think makes it smarter called PAI, or Personal AI Infrastructure. It's a tool that Daniel Miessler made, and he graciously made it available to all of us to use and build on. It adds skills and workflows and hooks and other customizations that kind of make Claude more powerful out of the box. And then you can add more to that, I think, a little bit easier than if you were just starting from scratch with Claude Code. Before we start, this video assumes that you'll be able to spin up a Linux VM and have some comfortability with the command line. You don't have to be a wizard at the command line, just some experience that'll help you get through this initial setup process. In fact, once you get into Claude, you can ask it for help and it'll help you do a lot of command line stuff, but you got to get there first. And if this is all new to you and you're like, I have no idea what that is, what the heck is a VM? All good. I'll put a link to my website in the description. And if you go to the article, it'll give you some commands to copy and paste. And I'll also leave some links there for how to set up a VM. I've got a video by Network Chuck that I think is pretty good that I put a link to there. And there will be an official Ubuntu article about how to use VirtualBox to set up a VM. And then when you get ready, you can come back here and pick back up on the process and we'll get you set up with Claude Code and PAI. The overall goal here is that we're trying to set up a contained environment for this thing to run in. And generally my recommendation is going to be to start with something like Ubuntu Server 2404. And that's just because it's easy to set up and a lot of folks will have an easier time getting into it. And it kind of puts us at a good position and starting point where it has a restricted user and you're not running as root when you immediately set it up, which I think are good security things for us to do here. And we're doing this because Claude Code can run commands and make API calls and write files. And until we're more comfortable with Claude Code and what it can do on our machines, it's better to put it in a sandbox or a contained environment. And for me, that's a Linux VM. So any way that you want to get Ubuntu set up works. If you want to do that in a VM, that's awesome. That's probably the freest way to do it because you can just run VirtualBox or something like that on your computer. Or if you have one of the newer Raspberry Pis with at least 8 gigs of RAM, that should do the trick. Or maybe an older computer that you're okay wiping and putting Ubuntu on there, that could work. Or for more advanced users, you could set something up in a VPS in the cloud like Linode or DigitalOcean or Vultr. Pretty much any of those situations will work. If you can just get to a fresh Linux command line, whatever distribution you're comfortable with, preferably a non-root user, you can start this process. So let's get into it. So here we are at a Linux command line on a basically blank server. I just have a fresh Ubuntu 2404 LTS install on here, and I'm running as a non-root user. I do have sudo access, so I can install things if I need to, and I'm just going to start working through the install process. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to run apt update and make sure our sudo access works. Great. So that's how we're updating what we need before we start installing any dependencies on the system here. And now we're going to run our install command for the 3 dependencies we'll need. You might already have these on your system, so it might just happen really quickly. We're installing curl, which we're going to need to download some things, git, which will help us download PAI a little bit better, and then zip, which is something that Bun will need. All right, so now we're going to start installing Claude Code. And if you go to the Claude Code website, it'll give you a little command that you can copy and paste in. And it's the same command you'll find linked on my website. And it basically is curl and then a URL, and then we're doing what's called a pipe into bash. Now, what's fun about that is we're basically downloading code from the internet and just blindly running it. Well, generally speaking, these two sources that we're choosing to trust them, Anthropic and Bun, Those are the two we'll be installing. But in most cases, it's considered a bad practice to just download something and immediately pipe it into running on your system. You'd want to review it and check it. I know that's asking a lot of people, especially if you're new to Linux or new to installing things this way. In this case, we're going to choose to trust these, but generally recommended don't just curl and pipe things into bash on your computer. But we're going to do just that right now. Okay, Claude Code installed. Now it's telling us to do this here, echo, we're going to put some stuff into our path. Basically that means is make it so that you can type in the word Claude at the command line and it'll just work. I put that same command so you can copy and paste it on my site. So now you should just be able to type Claude and it'll run, but I'm not going to run that now because I want to do some other stuff first. The next command we're going to install, we're going to do another fun curl piped into bash, but this is installing an app called Bun, which is basically a JavaScript runtime that PAI prefers to use. And then now that they're both loaded, I'm going to run this command, which is just going to say like, hey, recognize your new commands that we loaded into your shortcuts area. So now I'm just going to run two commands just to make sure it sees it. All right, cool. So that means that we successfully installed Claude. And there we go, Bun. Now we successfully installed Bun. That's nice. You're going to, just in case you're not on a perfectly fresh, clean computer and you have a Claude folder already on this computer, we're just going to back it up. This command will just copy any existing Claude settings directories you have and makes a backup of them. If you didn't have one, nothing happens. All right, now we're going to start installing PAI. It's just more copying and pasting of commands. We're going to git clone Daniel Miessler's PAI repository, which is just a fancy way of saying we're downloading his source code for his open source project to this server so we can have a copy of it for the future, but also use it right now. This is one of the install instructions you'll find if you go to the release for this particular version on GitHub, but I'm just going to give it to you here. We're basically copying the PAI releases version 2.5 because that's the version we're working with today. The Claude folder that's contained within there, we're copying that to the root of our user folder. And on this blank server where we also backed up the Claude folder just in case you had one, that should be a safe thing to do. So that's done. And then we're just going to move into that directory here. If you wanted to see what's in that directory, we're just going to look at that. There it is. That's the fun stuff we're starting with. And now I'm just going to run bun run install, and that's going to run the install script that came with this. All right, so it's going to work you through a couple of steps. First thing, it's going to ask you your name. You don't have to tell it a name. You can use the default there, which is user. I'm going to say Chris. Projects directory, I'm going to skip this for now, but that's something you can always come back to later. I'm doing this the really simple install version, which will be totally fine. You want to name your AI assistant? You can keep it PAI. I'm calling mine assistant for now. Maybe you have another name you've always wanted to use for your personal AI assistant. Startup catchphrase, that's what it'll say by default. If you don't change it, I think that's totally fine. This is going to ask you for an 11 Labs API key. And if that means nothing to you, don't worry about it. That's just a way to make this thing speak when you're ready. So you can come back to this later too. All right, and just like that, PAI 2.5 is installed. PAI right now is built typically just to run directly on a Mac. So there's a couple little quirks that we need to work out since we're running in Linux. Super easy to fix. First thing we need to do is just to run this command that tells it how to properly run the PAI command on a Linux system, because this instruction right here won't work out of the box. Well, this will, but it won't work long term. We're going to make it work long term. All right, so that's just going to copy what they put in this file over into this file, which is more Ubuntu at least specific. And yes, you could run ZSH on Ubuntu, but the default install of Ubuntu is not set up that way. And then I'm just going to run that source command again, which basically says, hey, note my new aliases. And now I should finally be able to run the command PAI. And there it is. Okay, so the first time you run that, Claude Code's going to come back and be like, hey, don't forget about me. I'm still here. And Claude Code is asking you, what are your color preferences? Dark mode, light mode, light mode, colorblind friendly. I'm just going to take the default here, the dark mode. And then it's going to ask you what kind of subscription you want to use, like how you want to pay for this. Well, essentially, the least expensive way to get into this is probably to just head over to Claude.ai and set up a Claude Pro account. That's going to run you about $20 a month as of the time of this video. And it should give you a fair amount of usage without having to worry about just infinite billing that'll happen if you use something like number 2, where you just give it your credit card and then it could run away with it. And people have gotten very large bills because they don't realize how expensive that could be. So if you know what you're doing, go ahead and do that. And if you have to do that for certain reasons, like, if the environment you're working in requires that, then go for it. But most people probably want to start with the first one. And I believe the minimum account that you can use with that is the Pro account. You can use all those other even more expensive accounts, which will just give you more room to work before you get limited and run out for the day. But start with a Pro account at Claude.ai. And if you already have a Claude Pro account, you can use that right here. So you're just going to pick the Claude account with subscription. Now it's going to say it's going to open a web browser. If this was installed on your machine, that would probably be true. But in this case, we're working on a remote Linux system, so that's not going to be true. You're going to have to copy and paste this URL into a separate web browser on your computer. If you're already logged into Claude.ai, like you just logged in because you were signing up or you were already logged in, then you can just hit the authorize button that comes up. Otherwise, you'll have to sign in here and then you'll get an authorize button. I'm going to press the authorize button on my screen and it's going to give me a code and I'm going to copy and paste that code back here. And then I'm just going to press enter. That has now linked my Claude Code install to the cloud and the subscription that Claude Code needs to run. And then it's going to give you some important security notes. Take these seriously. We'll talk more about prompt injections as we work through this, but also, AI can make mistakes and hallucinations. And isn't it fun if it does that within your computer that you're running? Again, that's why we're running this in a Linux sandbox. Okay, so now it wants to check the safety of that particular folder full of information and code, the one that we copied over from Daniel's GitHub. I choose to trust it. So yes, I trust this folder. And here we are. The top up here is sort of Claude Code's default display. And the bottom down here is the PAI stuff that Daniel added. This is a super awesome starting point. If you wanted to start working with it right here, you could just start talking to it. But there are a couple little differences between PAI and how it wants to work on a Mac and how we would hope for it to work on Linux. And I'm also going to help it make a couple things smoother for you as you start working through the process. So on my site, I've left this prompt. And you're just going to put this prompt in here that says, read this URL. And it's going to be a crazy looking URL from GitHub. And it should start talking you through what it's doing, what it's thinking based on this. So you're actually saying, read this URL and follow the instructions and adapt PAI for Linux. So this is PAI doing some of its magic. It's determining what we do and don't want. Then it's creating sort of an infrastructure for itself so that it can track and plan this process accordingly. Now it's realizing some of the changes we're asking it to make. And the first set of changes is really just to patch it so the status line displays a little more correctly for Linux. So now it's just doing all this work on its own. And the last part I'll come to in a minute is the Linux steering rules added for servers and runtime. This is just something I added to make it easier for your system to be able to communicate to you, even though it's in a VM, to give you links and such that work better for you who are not operating on the VM, you're working on a separate system outside of the VM. Because by default, it's assuming it's on the same system as you. So when it gives you links and things to look at things that we'll show in a demo in a minute, they might not work. They're probably going to be wrong. So this helps it understand how to better link you to it, even though it's in a different machine. So that's pretty much it. Now, I think this is a really good moment to take note of what just happened. We gave it a link, kind of like that whole piping curl to bash that we talked about earlier, where we say, hey, download this random code you've never checked from the internet and run it on this machine. So this is very similar to that. We're saying, hey, AI assistant, download this URL, read what it says and do what it says, right? That's actually a little bit spooky if you really think about it. And that's actually probably one of the biggest vulnerabilities in all this AI LLM stuff that we're running right now is if it goes out there and does web searches on your behalf, which it's going to do if you let it run as it's intended to run in the setup we're doing, and it's going to download files and open links that you give it, and any of those links could have instructions on them. Just like the instructions you're writing here, those links could have instructions on them that tell it to do something bad or something you're not expecting, and it might believe it. Now, we have some protections in place. That's why we're running it in a sandbox, first of all. Second of all, we do have some hooks that Daniel built into PAI that tell it to stop and think before it does certain activities that may leak your data outside. But none of this stuff is foolproof because all this stuff is still very new. The people who are hacking these systems are finding new clever ways to trick it. And it's just kind of like a cat and mouse game back and forth until we get the whole prompt injection problem worked out, which may never actually happen. So it's a good moment to just take note that this system, you just point it at a URL and say, read these instructions and do this thing. Now, my instructions that it linked to happen to not be malicious, but if someone had linked you to malicious instructions, your system may have downloaded some malware or worse, taken stuff that's running on the system and sent it to another person. Now, imagine if you had given this some sensitive information to work with. So that's why we want to be aware both of not giving this too much information while we're still learning it and learning how tricky and risky it can be, but also not giving it access to anything outside of this sandbox to make sure that it doesn't just make arbitrary changes to your system or add software to your system that you don't want to be there. Because it is going to go and download tools and do things on its own in the current state unless we limit it more. And I think this sandbox gives us a good environment to kind of look at that and learn from that and decide how we want to build a system that we're comfortable with before we start giving it anything sensitive or before we let it run on our personal computers. But if all went well here, like it says, PAI is now Linux compatible. I updated the version fields to 2.5, added cross-platform tools that basically make it work for Linux. And all this information should be more accurate now down here in this section. And it should be a little bit better at communicating with us in a remote machine. So at this moment, you're pretty well done. You have PAI sitting on top of Claude Code, sitting on top of Ubuntu, running in a virtual machine wherever you've got it running. And that's your whole playground, your environment, your sandbox, where you get to do and experiment and learn with these tools. It's here. So now I want to leave you with a simple example of what you could do with this that'll hopefully let you see the power of it and give you some ideas of where you could go next. And maybe after this, I'll do some follow-up videos and articles that give you more examples of what you could do with this and how I'm using it. I hope to do a security breakdown at some point. So stay tuned here or over on the website. So let's start by trying to build something. If you're at the site, there's a little prompt here that you can copy and paste, or just write something like this. It doesn't have to be this exact thing. Build me a simple web page that shows the current weather for, and then you can insert your city name. I'm in the Los Angeles area, so I'm just going to type Los Angeles. Use a free and open weather API that doesn't require an API key. That's just so you don't have to sign up for anything to do this. Fetch the current conditions and display them in a modern, nice-looking web page with a dark background. That's just what I like. You can write whatever you want there. Serve it so I can view it in my browser. Now it's going to go think. And I've run this test on a couple different systems just to see how it might vary. And it's interesting. Sometimes it actually gets you a page up running very fast. And sometimes it installs some tools to check its own work to see if it did a good job. And either version should end up with you having a neat little tool that you can look at and see the power of this. But in one version, it'll take a little bit longer because it'll run the tool installations, and also is a neat example of how it can just install its own tools. Like one of the things I've used it a lot for is helping me do 3D models for things I need around the house for 3D printing. And it'll install tools that it needs. It actually tells me what tools it needs to be able to do that. Once I give it instructions on 3D modeling, how it can actually turn that into designs for me. And different runs of this thing could lead to it asking for different tools, which is also really interesting. So one of the other really cool powers that you get with PAI and Claude Code is you can build skills. So the first time I have a run with building something out with a 3D model for 3D printing, I would probably ask it to stop and help me capture that as a skill. And if I knew what I wanted in advance, I could build a skill in advance. But I'll typically say, work through a new process, a new workflow, maybe using an existing skill, maybe not, and then add a new skill when I finish that process. Okay, cool. So it looks like it's wrapping up. And don't panic if you see errors. It usually knows how to recover from them. That's the magic of this. It's able to see what's actually happening. If it makes a mistake, it checks it, it fixes it. There we go, it fixed it. Okay, so here we go. This is an example of it trying to download the tools it needs to do a screenshot of the web page to check its own work. Like I said, I've run this a few times and it doesn't always do this. Isn't that interesting? So this stuff isn't always going to have the same results, which also has security implications. You can't always be sure what it's going to do. Unlike when you do that curl piped into bash, you more or less, as long as the script doesn't change, you know what it's going to do. Versus instructions downloaded from the internet and piped into it, or just typed here, they may not always do the same thing. Okay, cool. I wasn't paying close enough attention to see if it did download the browser tools or not. Okay, it looks like it tried to, but it realized it didn't have what it needed to run it, so it stopped. See, that's a third category. Sometimes it'll actually say, oh, I don't have the tools, let me install them. And in a future run, or if you ask it to, hey, install the tools you need to check your work, it'll probably do that. Either way, let's look at this web page it gave me a link to. Don't use the top one because that only works if you're on the same computer. And this is the one where it actually took note of those extra instructions we gave it when we did that prompt injection. We're going to click this one, and there it is. There's the nice little web page it made for us based on that request. And I think if you refresh it, that'll load fresh data. So if you just leave this running and you refresh it later, it may or may not have new information. It should. It looks like it's pulling from the API. So there you go. That is a very simple example of the types of things this can do for you. So where do you go next? Spend some time with it. Play with it. Build with it. Break it. If you break it, that's another part of the magic of this running in a virtual machine. You can just rebuild it. Just delete it and start again. It's super easy to start fresh if you need to, especially after you get some practice with that. Or in a lot of cases, you won't break it. You'll just ask it to help you fix itself, or ask it to help you learn a command that you don't actually know how it works. Just like all the powerful stuff you can do with ChatGPT or Claude in the browser or in an app, you can do here, but also ask it to run things for you, and also ask it to look at what it just did. So just do that, keep playing with it, and eventually it'll kind of expand your horizons on what it's capable of. As I have success with doing little experiments like having a page built that just shows me the weather in real time, that might spark an idea for what I want to do with it next. So take your ideas, take the stuff you've been wanting to plan or build or organize, and see if it can do it. Right now, you probably noticed the limitation where how do you get files into this? Well, some people will know how to do that. And if you don't, I hope to make a follow-up video really soon that shows you how to build another little tool that allows you to drop files in here and exchange files with it really easily. And you may already see the vision of how you might do that based on that example we just did. You could probably ask it to help you build a tool like that, but I'll run through an example of that soon. And once you've had a little time exploring this, I highly recommend checking out Daniel's original PAI article where he introduces PAI and how it's built and the philosophies behind it and how it helps make Claude Code smarter. It's a really good deep dive. It's just, I think it's really helpful to get your hands on it first before you go read that article so that the dots connect a little bit better with all the good information there. So I'll leave a link to that in the description and over on my site. So check it out. Stay tuned. Have fun with this. Build something, break it, and then build something else awesome.